Hello, writers. The other day, we worked on making sure we were adding some good action to our setting, while also making sure that we're breaking up our dialogue with different descriptions. Today, I'm going to show you another way to make your story more exciting and add some more details. Something that is really, really important as we write our realistic fiction stories is making sure that we include conflict and tension. So today we're going to learn how to add more conflict and tension among the characters in our stories in order to build the suspense. Now think about some of your favorite stories that you've read. How did that author make that story interesting? By having some conflicts and tensions among the characters. Think about Number the Stars. What is conflict and tension? Well, conflict is the obstacle that stands in the character's way from achieving their wants or needs. Now, tension will occur from the character failing at achieving those wants and needs. Think about your own personal experiences. When you really, really want to achieve something and it's just not going your way, you might feel tense. You might feel really, really anxious or eager to achieve that. Well, we want that to come out in our characters. Why is it important to have these things in your story? Well, by establishing conflict in the beginning and resolving the conflict by the end of the story, you give your story direction, motion, and purpose. Without it, the story would drift along with no beginning, middle, or end. If we didn't have any conflict, the story might not be very exciting. Conflict kicks off the action and gets the story started. Conflict helps develop the character, and we learn more about them as they try to solve the conflict and have to struggle a little bit. We don't want everything to go our main character's way. We want some things to kind of sidetrack them, push them off a little bit so that they have to work towards achieving what they want. Well, let's talk about what kind of conflicts that we can include in our story. We have person-to-person conflict, which is when a character has a struggle with another character in the story. An example of this would be maybe one character bullies another character. Another kind of conflict is person versus self conflict. The character has to struggle within himself or herself. For example, maybe being scared of something, being scared of spiders. And then lastly, there's person versus the environment. The character is struggling with the forces of nature. Maybe the character is fighting against bad weather conditions, like a hurricane. We likely will be focusing more so on person-to-person conflict or person versus self-conflict. Here's what we can do. Here are some ways that you can include conflict in your story. You're going to decide what your characters want and put an obstacle in their way. This could be a person. This could be something else. Have characters with opposing or opposite viewpoints. Something maybe they argue about or disagree with. Another way is that you could make things complicated for the character. And then lastly, you could raise the stakes for the character. Give them something to lose. So thinking about when we raise the stakes, it's harder and harder for them to achieve something. And there's something that they really, really want that might get lost. So what you're going to do is this activity that you will see on Seesaw. We want to make sure that the best characters are active ones. When you develop your character, we often find that the tension and conflict builds on itself. Today, we are going to see if our stories have enough conflict and how we are building that conflict. So what we need to do as part of good writers always go back and reread their writing every time, making sure that does their writing make sense? Well, now we're reading through the lens of conflict and tension. You're going to ask yourself, do I have enough conflict and tension in my story? So step one is to reread your entire story. Step two, you're going to find where your conflict begins. Remember, this should be in the beginning of your story. Step three, highlight that part of the story. Step 4, look to see how you can build the tension within your story. And I have an organizer that we're going to take a look at, which you'll record your responses. And you will jot down some ideas of ways that you can build the conflict in your story. Step 4, find another part in your story before the climax. So if we're looking at our story mountain here, we want to make sure that our conflict is introduced right away. And then we also want to make sure that we're building on this conflict as our rising action occurs. The climax is at the very peak here. We want our tension and conflict to kind of really be strong right along here as we go up through our rising action. Then you're going to highlight that part of the story for step 6. So you're going to do this twice. You're finding 2 parts in your story. And you're going to rewrite the 2 scenes in your story, which builds on the conflict and makes your story have tension. Then the last thing you're going to do is draw a picture of one of those scenes, putting yourself in the character's shoes. All right, so if I go on to the next page, you're going to see an organizer that looks like this. So when you follow the steps, the conflict in my story is, this is where you're going to record that. Maybe when my main character gets bullied by one of the kids at school. So you would write that in there. And my main character gets bullied by another girl at school. Okay. My revision, adding more tension. This is where you're going to need to get creative. You're going to think about putting yourself in that character's shoes. Okay, your main character is getting bullied. Well, what would that feel like for that character? What might your main character say or do? What might the other opposing character say or do to build that tension? I might add some dialogue. Maybe I have some screaming or yelling. Maybe I have, some action where something's being thrown. Now, if I think again, we were supposed to find 2 pieces. So another place I can add more conflict is you're going to find another part right before the climax of your story where you can add more conflict. So I might think about maybe another place of conflict is when my main character gets lost in the mountains. Okay. I'm thinking about how can I add more tension? Well, I might really want to build this up. And how might it feel to be lost in the mountains when you're alone and you don't know where to go? What might I be thinking? What might I be feeling? What might I be seeing that might be kind of scary? I would build that by adding a lot of description. And I would write that here in this section. The last part you're going to need to do is pick one of your scenes that you chose to revise and put yourself in the shoes of the character. What would it look like? Part of being good writers is making sure you're visualizing exactly what you're writing. What would that look like? So this is really going to help us see what your story and your conflict is all about. All right, writers, there was a lot of information in here. Please go back and make sure you go to the front. These are your steps to follow for your assignment. Make sure to have your realistic fiction story up so that you can easily access and highlight. And if you want a refresher on how you highlight a scene in your story, I'll go to my chapter here. Maybe I need to add more conflict here. I'm going to highlight my section and I'm going to go to this little marker and I'm going to highlight it there. And now I need to figure out how I'm going to make this better, how I'm going to make this really tense and really add some conflict among my characters. All right, writers, off you go.